October
Good evening, traveler. Come on in, get
1872,
warm by the fire.
southeastern
Thank you kindly, ma'am.
Kansas. The sun is bleeding out across the prairie, and your horse is done. You have been in the saddle since dawn. Your back hurts. Your canteen is empty. The wind off the grass smells like coal smoke and old cooking, and somewhere inside that smell is the promise of a hot meal and a bed, because the trail you are riding, the Great Osage Trail between Independence and Fort Scott, has exactly one inn worth stopping at for the next 40 miles. You see the cabin from a quarter-mile out. A single kerosene lamp glowing in the window, smoke rising slow from the chimney. A young woman, maybe 23, standing in the doorway with her hand raised in greeting. She tells you supper is on. She tells you the coffee is fresh. She
Much
takes your
obliged
horse
for the
like she has
welcome,
done it
ma'am.
1,000
Our
times before.
hospitality is
She has
legendary
done
in
it
these parts.
1,000 times
Come in, the
before.
stove
That is the
warm.
problem. You walk through the door. Inside
Welcome
is a
to our
single
roadhouse,
room,
sir.
16
Please
feet
come
by
in from the cold.
24, with a wood stove glowing in the corner and a heavy wagon canvas curtain hanging from a wire straight down the middle of the cabin. The curtain billows slightly in a draft you cannot quite place. Behind it, you assume, is the kitchen. You smell something cooking. You hear nothing else. She seats you at a small dining table. There is exactly one chair on your side. It faces the curtain. You sit down because you are tired, and the chair is positioned, although you do not know this yet, exactly 12 inches from a hammer. Welcome to the Bender Inn. There were 4 of them. John Bender Sr., the silent old man who barely looked at guests. Elvira, called Ma, the woman who served the food and never finished an English sentence. John Bender Jr., who laughed too much at things that were not funny. And Kate Bender, 23 years old, the daughter, the lure, the public face, the one who took your horse. Modern investigators believe none of the 4 were biologically related to each other. 2 of them were married. The family unit was a cover, not a fact. Between the spring of 1871 and March of 1873, this cabin on the Osage Trail killed at least 11 travelers, possibly more than 20. In May of 1873, investigators walked the orchard out back with iron rods and pulled crushed skulls out of the soft soil for 3 solid days. Every recovered victim had been struck on the right side of the head with a heavy hammer. Every throat had been cut after death. Everybody had been buried in a row of saplings planted on land that nobody questioned, because saplings need a lot of digging. Hollywood will tell you the Wild West was tamed by lawmen with badges and fast guns at high noon. The Wild West was actually run by empty cabins, missing persons reports nobody filed, and quiet neighbors who knew exactly what was going on at the place down the road and decided it was none of their business. The food at the Bender Inn was reportedly mediocre. Multiple eyewitness accounts complained about the salt pork. That turned out not to be the worst review the establishment received. Here is the chilling truth this video is going to walk you through. Before Ed Gein, before H.H. Holmes and his murder castle, before the FBI even invented the words serial killer almost a century later, a family of 4 ran an industrial-scale murder operation on a public American road, killed at least 11 men in cold blood, walked away from the largest manhunt of the entire 19th century, and were never caught. Not by Colonel York, not by the Pinkertons, not by time, not by anyone, ever. If you came here for romanticized cowboy nostalgia, click off now. This channel does not sell that. We sell the real frontier, the one that
Look
smelled
here.
like quicklime and
Details are
salt
worse
pork,
than we
the
imagined.
one your 7th grade textbook
How could
quietly
folks be
forgot.
capable of such
Hit
evil?
subscribe to The Dark Ledge and stay for the real dark history of America. Now sit down at the table. The curtain behind you is already moving. October 1870, 3 years before the orchard starts talking. The wagon rolls into Labette County with 4 passengers and almost nothing else. No livestock worth mentioning. No crates of
160
family
acres.
silver.
Sign here.
No
Thank you
relatives
kindly.
waiting at the land office. Just 4 adults filing a claim on 160 acres of prairie, and a story that does not survive 5 minutes of real scrutiny. They call themselves Bender. They are not the Benders. Investigators would later determine that John Sr. was likely a German national named John Flickinger. Ma was a widow on her 3rd or 4th marriage, born somewhere in the Adirondacks, allergic to questions. Kate was 23 or 24, depending on which census taker she felt like lying to that week. John Jr. was not her brother. He was her husband or her lover, or both. And the family resemblance everyone politely commented on came from the same place a lot of frontier resemblance came from in 1870. They had practiced. This is the first thing modern television gets wrong about the Bloody Benders. They were not a family. They were a 4-person crew using the family unit as a cover identity. Pioneer society would scrutinize a single man living with 3 strangers. It would not scrutinize a mom, a dad, a son, and a daughter sharing a cabin on the trail. Camouflage by demographic. The oldest trick in America, the cabin goes up fast. 16 feet by 24 feet. 1 room, a wood stove, a loft for sleeping, and running straight down the middle of the room, dividing the public side from the private side, a heavy wagon canvas hanging from a wire. The same curtain you have been thinking about since the first minute of this video. Behind that curtain, a bed, a wash basin, a butcher knife, and a sledge in front of it. A dining table with a single chair facing the cloth. You sit in that chair. Your skull is now 17 inches from a hammer. You do not know that yet. You will not get the chance to find out. The cellar gets dug next. 6 feet deep. Packed earth floor. Quicklime stacked in the corner. A trapdoor cut into the floorboards above it. Hinged on the kitchen side of the curtain, sitting directly under the dining table. The orchard goes in last, a tidy row of saplings planted across an acre of soft soil that is going to need a lot of digging in the months to come. By the time the first traveler stops for coffee, the entire architecture of the kill room is already in place. Nothing about this is improvised. This is the second thing television gets wrong. The Benders did not slowly degenerate into murder. They built the kill house first and went looking for guests second. The cabin was the weapon. Everything else was scenery. By spring of 1871, the Bender Inn is open for business. Travelers along the Great Osage Trail, the main artery connecting Independence to Fort Scott, start stopping for a meal and a bed. Word spreads, especially about Kate. Kate Bender is the lure, and Kate Bender is good at her job. She speaks fluent English while her parents barely manage broken sentences.
Thank you
She
kindly,
is,
ma'am.
by every contemporary account, attractive in a frontier kind of way. She lectures publicly, she prints handbills, she advertises herself as Professor Miss Katie
It's a long
Bender,
way to
healer of the
Cherryvale,
blind,
mister.
the
You
deaf,
best rest
and the
here tonight.
demonically
We
afflicted.
wouldn't want you
She
getting
holds
lost in the
seances in
darkness.
Cherryvale, charges $1 a head,
The
and
road
tells
can be
widows
treacherous, but
exactly
you are
what their
safe
dead
now,
husbands
honored
want
in
them to
our
hear.
home.
Her religion
Please
was
eat.
spiritualism,
The
the
veil between our
fastest
world and the
growing belief
next is
system in
thin here in
post-war
Cherryvale.
America.
The
After the
spirits
Civil
long to
War
speak
buried
with us, if only we
750,000 men, the
listen.
country went a little crazy trying to talk to them. Mediums got famous. Tables levitated. Kate cashed in. What makes Kate effective as a serial killer is not the
Do you think it's true,
supernatural act.
Cyrus?
It is the fact that the supernatural act is a referral engine. A man whose brother died at Shiloh sits with Kate for a reading, leaves a believer, and tells the next traveler he meets that there is a spiritualist on the Osage Trail worth visiting. He tells the wrong man. The wrong man rides out to see her, sits in the wrong chair, and never makes it home. Kate did not just lure victims, she made them advertise. This is the third thing television gets wrong. The lone wolf killer trope, the brooding solo man who hunts alone, was invented by screenwriters who needed a single villain to fit in a single frame. The Benders ran a 4-station assembly line. Kate brought the customer, Ma served the food, John Sr. or John Jr. swung the hammer. All 4 buried what was left. It was a small business with a clean org chart, and the business was profitable. A successful westward migrant in 1871 was not a desperate refugee. He was a walking strongbox. He carried gold coin sewn into his coat lining, a horse worth
Evening, friend.
$80, a
You'll
saddle
find a
worth
warm bed
30,
and a
a
square
wagon
meal
worth
inside. Mighty
150, a
fine
rifle,
folk.
a watch, boots, and whatever he had not yet spent at the last trading post. Kill one outfitted settler, and you cleared between $400 and $800 in goods. The average Kansas farmhand made $12 a month. You do the math. The Benders did. The cabin smelled like overcooked beef and coal smoke. The cellar smelled like wet lime. The orchard smelled like nothing yet, because the saplings were too young to bear fruit and the bodies were buried too deep for the prairie wind to find them. Yet, by February of 1873, neighbors were starting to notice a pattern. A cattleman named Jones, last seen heading toward the Bender place with $300 in his coat lining, never made it to his next stop. A man was pulled out of Drum Creek with his throat opened, and his skull collapsed on the right side. Another disappeared. Another. Travelers were arriving in Fort Scott with stories about a strange inn near the Drum Creek crossing where the daughter would not stop staring at their pocket watches. Nobody acted. This is the fourth thing television gets wrong about frontier life. The myth says the prairie was lawless and isolated. The truth was uglier. The prairie had county sheriffs, Methodist potlucks, telegraph offices, and gossip networks that ran from Street Louis to Santa Fe. People knew something was wrong at the Bender place. They just decided it was not their problem. Kate was a local celebrity. The German immigrant community closed ranks. The Pioneer Code valued minding your own business above almost any other virtue. And the missing men were strangers, transients, drifters, Eastern boys passing through. They were not cousins. Nobody was going to ride 200 miles through Indian Territory to ask whether their second cousin had ever paid his check at the Bender Inn. The Benders had picked their location well. They had picked their victims even better. Records confirm Ma Bender attended at least one community potluck dinner in
This friend
Cherryvale
wasn't here
during this period.
yesterday.
She brought
He
a
must have headed
casserole.
south.
The recipe
It's cold
is,
tracking a man this
mercifully,
time of
not
year.
preserved. Then, in March of 1873, the math broke. Dr. William Henry York, a respected physician
That
from
drawing
Independence,
is at
Kansas,
the place
mounts
near
his
Drum
horse on the
Creek.
morning of March 9 and
Keep your
rides
voice
east.
down, mister.
He has just finished
don't need
visiting
trouble.
his older brother. He tells him he intends to stop somewhere along the way for a hot meal. He has a particular inn in mind. He has heard about the daughter. He never arrives home. Dr. York's brother is Colonel Alexander York, United States Army. His other brother is a sitting state senator. The Bender family had spent 2.5 years selecting victims nobody would ever come looking for. They had just killed the only one America was guaranteed to miss. Stop the video for 1 second. Be honest with yourself. You live in 1872. Your nearest neighbor is a strange family. Travelers keep stopping at their inn and never coming back. Other neighbors are whispering. The sheriff is 40 miles away. You are not related to any of the missing men. Speaking up means making 4 enemies who own a hammer and a cellar. Staying quiet means going home, eating supper, and sleeping in a warm bed. Tell us in the comments. Be brutally honest. Would you have ridden into Cherryvale to file the report, or would you have minded your own business like every other neighbor on the Osage Trail? Drop your answer below. Hit the like button to feed the algorithm with real history, the kind your school left out. Then come back, because Act 2 is where we open the trap door. To understand what happened to Dr. York in the last 90 minutes of his life, you have to understand the machine that killed him. The Bender Inn was not a crime scene. It was a factory. And like any good factory, the workflow had been refined to the point of boredom. This is how you die at the Bender Inn. You arrive at dusk. The sun is bleeding out across the
Good
prairie.
evening,
The
Dr.
air
York.
smells
Please
like
come in
coal
by the
smoke
fire.
and overdone beef, and you have
Much
been in the
obliged.
saddle for 9 hours. Kate steps out of the cabin to greet you. She smiles. She takes your horse. She tells you supper is on. You loosen your gun belt because nobody draws on a meal. She seats you at the table. There is exactly 1 chair on your side. Your back is to that heavy canvas curtain you have been hearing about since the first minute of this video. You do not register the seating arrangement as strange, because frontier cabins often subdivide a single room with cloth. What you do not notice is that the chair is positioned deliberately, exactly 17 inches from the cloth, and your skull is now centered on a small gap in the canvas
Doctor,
where two
did you bring
seams
your family
almost
with you on
meet
this
but do
trip?
not quite
No, just
touch.
myself this
Ma
time, thank
Bender
you.
brings you food, coffee, bread, salt pork if you are lucky. She says almost nothing because she barely speaks English, and you read her silence as immigrant shyness. It is not. Behind the curtain, 12 inches from the back of your head, John Sr. or John Jr. is standing very still, holding a claw hammer or a heavy sledge in both hands. Kate sits across from you and engages you in conversation. She asks about your family. She asks what brought you west. She asks if you have ever lost anyone you loved, because she is a spiritualist and she would be honored to make contact. She is not making contact. She is verifying the silhouette of your skull against the canvas. She is timing the moment. When she nods, the hammer comes through. The first blow lands on the right parietal region of your skull, slightly above and behind your right ear. Coroner reports from May of 1873 confirm this with cold consistency across every recovered victim. The blow is engineered to crush, not to penetrate. You do not scream because you do not have time. The second blow is administered after you are already dead. It is for housekeeping. The trap door beneath your chair is yanked open from the kitchen side. Your body is rolled or shoved through the opening into the cellar. You drop 6 feet onto packed earth. You weigh whatever you weighed in life. A fall like that, dead weight, makes a sound the family had stopped noticing months ago. Down in the cellar, John Jr. or John Sr. takes a butcher knife and opens your throat from one side of the windpipe to the other. This is not for killing. You have been dead for 90 seconds. This is for drainage, less mess in the wagon later. Less mess in the soil, less mess everywhere. Your pockets are emptied, your
Note the
boots come
contusions.
off, your
Repeated
coat is
impacts to the
searched
right
along the
side,
lining for the
consistent with
gold
a heavy
coin that
blunt
westward
object.
travelers
Mark
always
that in the
sewed into
ledger.
their hems because they were certain nobody would think to look there. Everyone looked there. The Benders looked there first. That night, after the cabin lamps go out and the road is empty, your body is dragged from the cellar, hauled across 50 yards of yard, and dropped into a grave in the orchard that was dug 3 days ago and has been waiting for whoever showed up at the right hour. Quicklime gets thrown on top. Dirt goes back over the lime. A sapling gets watered. In the morning, the family eats breakfast at the same table. Now read all of that again and notice what is missing. Rage, hesitation,
Sit down, please.
argument,
We don't get many travelers
improvisation.
this late.
The Benders did not kill in fits
Is
of
the door
passion.
clear?
They killed on a clock. Forensic investigators examining the recovered skulls in May of 1873 noted a detail that is still cited in criminology texts today. Every single victim had been struck on the right side of the skull. The angle of impact was identical. The depression pattern was identical. One person was swinging the hammer, and that person was right-handed, and that person stood in the exact same spot for every kill every time. This is the fifth thing television gets wrong. The Benders did not lose control. They were a workflow. The cabin was the instrument. The killer behind the curtain might as well have been punching a time card. Most American serial killers ramp up. Their crime scenes get sloppier as the addiction takes over. The Benders did the opposite. The longer they ran the inn, the cleaner the kills became. By their last winter, they were operating with the surgical patience of a slaughterhouse line foreman who has done this 1,000 times and gone home to dinner without thinking about it. Then, in late 1872, the family did the only sloppy thing in the entire record. They killed George Newton Longcore and his daughter, Mary Ann Launcher. Launcher was a recently widowed farmer riding from Iowa toward a new claim in Texas. He stopped at the Bender Inn in November or December of 1872. Mary Ann was traveling with him. She was 18 months old. The coroner's examination in May of 1873 found George Launcher with the standard signature. Crushed right parietal, throat cut, buried face down. Mary Ann was found in the same grave beneath her father. She had no skull fracture. She had no knife wound. The medical examination was unambiguous. The 18-month-old child had been buried alive. Take a breath, then come back. The Benders did not waste a hammer blow on a child too small to fight, too small to identify them, and too small to run for help. They saved a swing. Frontier economics, all the way down. By spring of 1873, the orchard contained at least 11 bodies. Investigators eventually located the graves by walking the orchard with iron rods, pushing each rod into the soil and feeling for the soft fill of a recent dig. The quicklime had failed. Bodies were still partially clothed. Some had rope around the wrists. One had been gagged with a strip of bedsheet. The Reverend J.G. Dienst, who attended the excavation, described the smell as sweet, gas-heavy, like a slaughterhouse left in the sun for a week. He did not eat for 3 days afterward. This is the sixth thing television gets wrong. Quicklime does not destroy bodies, it preserves them. Hollywood has been lying about this for 90 years. The Benders, like every other amateur who confused crime fiction with chemistry, learned this the hard way. So did the 11 men in their orchard. Although by then the lesson was theoretical for everyone involved. Which brings us back to Dr. William Henry York. By late March of 1873, his older brother, Colonel Alexander York of the United States Army, has finished waiting. William has been missing for 2 weeks. The colonel saddles his horse, gathers a small group of armed men, and rides the Osage Trail in reverse, retracing his brother's last known route, stopping at every cabin and every crossroads, asking every neighbor the same simple question. Did a doctor on a bay horse stop here for a meal in early March? On a clear afternoon in late March, Colonel York rides up to the Bender cabin. He dismounts, he knocks. Kate opens the door, smiles, and tells him that yes, she remembers the doctor very well. He stopped for coffee. He left at sundown. She invites the colonel inside for a hot meal. There is a chair waiting at the table. There is fresh canvas hanging behind it. The colonel says yes. He sits down. His back is to the curtain. He is now 12 inches from a hammer and has no idea. Whatever he says next, over the next 10 minutes, whatever question he asks, whatever look passes between him and Kate Bender across the rim of his coffee cup, it changes the family's calculation in real time. For the first time in 3 years, the Benders do something they have never done before. They hesitate. By dawn the next morning, the Bender Inn is empty. The cattle are starving in the yard,
We need more
and
intensity
4
right here in
killers are
Act 3.
gone.
This is crucial for
The
the
orchard,
climax.
however,
Even with
is
the
still
lighting cue?
there.
Yes, exactly.
And it is
then.
about to
All right,
start
let's take
talking.
it from the top.
The cabin sits empty for 9 days before anyone bothers to investigate. That number is not a typo. 9 days from the night the Benders vanished in late March of 1873 to the moment a neighbor named Billy Tolles finally walked up the path on May 5 and tried the door. Almost a week and a half passed, in which the cattle in the yard slowly starved, the chickens went feral, and the smell from the orchard got worse every afternoon as the soil warmed. Nobody investigated, nobody knocked, nobody filed a missing persons report on a family of 4 that nobody had ever liked very much in the first place. The same neighborly minding of business that had let the Benders kill at least 11 people on a public road now bought them a head start measured in days, not hours. By the time someone got curious, it was already over. When Tolles opened the cabin door, he stepped into a kitchen that smelled like a slaughterhouse. Flies in the rafters. The trapdoor under the dining table standing open. The cellar floor caked black with what looked like dried molasses and was not. A butcher knife sitting on a shelf. The wagon canvas curtain still hanging from its wire, sagging now with a stiff dark spray pattern across the lower half that nobody had bothered to clean because the cleaning crew had left in too much of a hurry. He rode straight for the sheriff. Within 48 hours, a search party of nearly 200 men, neighbors, soldiers, drifters, and the ghoulishly curious descended on the Bender clan. They walked the orchard with iron rods, pushing each rod into the soil and listening for the soft give of disturbed earth. The first body came up on the morning of May 7. It was Dr. William Henry York, crushed right parietal, throat cut from one side to the other, buried face down. His brother, Colonel Alexander York, was on site when the soil opened. Witnesses said the colonel did not speak for the rest of the day. By sundown, they had found 3 more. By the end of the 3rd day, they had 11. The cabin itself did not survive the week. Within 72 hours, souvenir hunters had stripped it to the studs. Pieces of the canvas curtain were sold for $1 each. A man in Cherryvale paid $3 for one of the dining table chairs and displayed it in his shop window for the next 20 years. The hammer was never recovered, neither was the butcher knife of record. Both had presumably ridden west with the family. This is the 7th thing television gets wrong. Crime scene preservation. In 1873, Kansas did not exist. Forensic photography barely existed. Most of what we now know about the Bender Inn is reconstructed from sketches, eyewitness affidavits, and the memories of men who picked through the cabin while it was still warm. The original physical evidence was distributed across half the state as keepsakes inside of a week. Governor Thomas A. Osborne issued a reward of $2,000 for the capture of any Bender, dead or alive. He raised it to $3,000 within the month. Detective agencies, including the Pinkertons, took the case. Posses formed in Cherryvale, in Independence, in Fort Scott, in Texas, in the Indian Territory, in Street Lewis. Telegrams flew. Newspapers in Chicago, New York, and Philadelphia ran sketches of Kate Bender on the front page. The hunt was, by the standards of 1,873, the largest manhunt in American history. Up to that date, it caught nobody. Not in 1873, not in 1875, not in 1880, not ever. Read that twice. The largest manhunt in American history up to that point ended with 0 arrests, 0 convictions, 0 confessions, and 0 confirmed corpses. The Benders crossed the prairie in a covered wagon at the speed of a tired horse and disappeared so completely that 153 years later, in 2026, the case file at the Kansas Historical Society remains officially open. This is the 8th thing television gets wrong. The American myth of the closed case, the satisfying ending where the killer gets cornered in a ditch and shot, is propaganda. The Bloody Benders are the loudest counter-argument in our national archive. Justice did not catch them, vigilantes did not catch them, the Pinkertons did not catch them, time did not catch them. They walked off the page. The legends, however, multiplied immediately, because no culture tolerates an unsolved horror for very long. 3 of them got printed enough times to become folk truth. All 3 are garbage. Legend 1 says, Colonel York's posse caught the family within 100 miles of the cabin, executed them on the spot, burned the bodies, and swore an oath of silence. There is no corroborating evidence. Colonel York personally denied the story on the record multiple times until his death. The men named in later versions of the tale were not in Kansas at the dates given. The story exists because Americans needed it to exist. Legend 2 says Ma and Kate were burned alive in their wagon by frontiersmen near the Texas border, and that the men involved tossed the ashes into a river. The single source for this is a deathbed confession given in 1909 by a man on his deathbed in 1909, a known fabulist with no documented connection to the original poses, who had never lived in Labette County, and who changed key details every time he told the story. Historians dismiss it, the public does not. Legend 3 is the one with paperwork, and it is the most damning. In November of 1889, 16 years after the orchard, 2 women were arrested in Niles, Michigan on suspicion of being Ma and Kate Bender. They were extradited to Oswego, Kansas. A trial was scheduled. Witnesses from Cherryvale traveled to identify them. Some said yes, some said no. The judge ruled the identification insufficient. Charges were dropped. The two women walked out of the courthouse, into a hotel, into a train station, and back into the void. Whether they were the Benders is a question the state of Kansas decided on the record not to
Are
answer.
we sure these
What
are
probably
authentic, Thomas?
actually happened is
The label
much more
suggests a
boring and
most
much worse than
peculiar
any of the
ailment.
legends.
Look at that
The
old
family
hammer.
almost certainly split up at the Texas
They say
border.
John used
They
it
traveled by
himself.
rail under new names. They settled in different communities. They worked, paid rent, attended church, and died of natural causes between the 1880s and the early 1900s in their own beds in towns where nobody ever asked the right question. If you are descended from Kansas, Texas, or Missouri pioneer stock, there is a non-zero chance that one of your great-great-grandparents went to a quilting circle with Ma Bender under a different name and came home and said she seemed nice but kept to herself. America's first serial killer family did not get caught because America was not yet equipped to imagine that a family could be a serial killer. We had to invent the concept after the fact, and by then the Benders were already drinking sweet tea on someone else's porch in someone else's county. The 11 skulls recovered from the orchard, by the way, did not get a respectful burial. They were displayed in Cherryvale storefronts as paid tourist attractions for almost 40 years. Visitors paid a nickel to look at them. Pieces of the cabin's foundation stones were sold by mail order to collectors as far away as Boston. The Bender case is the godfather of American true crime tourism. Every Lizzie Borden gift shop, every Manson family documentary, every podcast booth at CrimeCon is downstream of those 11 skulls sitting under glass on a Cherryvale shelf. 11 graves in the orchard. 20-plus suspected victims based on missing persons reports along the Osage Trail. 4 killers, 0 arrests, 0 convictions, 0 confessions. The largest manhunt in 19th century American history, and 1 open file sitting in a climate-controlled archive in Topeka that the state of Kansas has not been able to close in 153 years. Quick check-in. If you are still watching this far into the video, click the like button right now. Just do it. 15 seconds? It costs you nothing. We are about to enter the darkest part of this story. The darkest part of the Bender story is not the hammer. It is not the canvas curtain. It is not the cellar floor. It is not even the 18-month-old child found beneath her father's body in a quicklime pit. The darkest part is the math. 4 killers. 11 confirmed corpses, possibly more than 20. The largest manhunt in 19th century American history, and no one ever paid for any of it. The Benders won. Read that sentence back to yourself one more time. The Benders won. They committed industrial-scale murder on a public road in the United States of America, crossed 2 state lines in a slow wagon, and beat the entire continental justice system of 1,873. They almost certainly died as old men and old women in rocking chairs, on porches, surrounded by grandchildren, in towns whose names nobody now remembers and nobody ever thought to record. This is the true cost of the Wild West that John Ford never put on a screen. The country we mythologize, with the lone marshal and the hanging judge and the noble cowboy at high noon, is a marketing campaign run after the fact by men who needed Americans to feel good about a continent built on unmarked graves. The actual Wild West was the Bender Inn. Strangers vanished. Neighbors said nothing. The sheriff was 40 miles away. The killer ate breakfast at the table where you ate dinner the night before. Manifest Destiny had a body count, and most of those bodies were not native, and they were not soldiers, and they were not outlaws shot in the street at noon. They were tired men on tired horses who stopped at the wrong cabin for a hot meal because their faith in American hospitality was the last thing they ever felt. The Bender Orchard is a small piece of land in southeastern Kansas. You can drive past it today on a paved road. There is a historical marker. There is no fence. The trees are gone. The cabin is gone. The graves were emptied a century and a half ago, and the bodies were reburied somewhere else, and most of those 11 men still have no names attached to them on any stone you can visit. If they had names, the Bloody Benders would never have killed them. That was the whole point. So return now to the cabin door, sun bleeding out across the prairie, smell of coal smoke, a canvas curtain hanging on a wire, slightly billowing in a draft you cannot place. In the first minute of this video, you assumed that curtain hit a kitchen. You assumed wrong. The curtain hides 4 killers who stepped through it in March of 1873 and never came back out. Not in a courtroom, not in a coffin, not in a confession, not in 153 years. It is still hanging. If you made it through this entire video without skipping, congratulations. You survived the Bender Inn. That is more than the 11 men in the orchard managed. Drop the word survived in the comments below. One word, all caps. We read every single one. Then hit subscribe to The Dark Ledge, because the next episode of Grim Reality is already queued up, and it is another piece of American history they did not let your 7th grade teacher mention. The hammer was never found. The curtain was never lifted. You are the only one still looking at it.